some of that now. I mean, this is a bit geopolitical, a little bit off my beaten track, but if you think about what's happening about the Brexit and the rise of right-wing populism in Brazil, in Hungary, Poland, a large part of that is tied to, well, all this money that everyone seems to be making, we're not seeing any of that, so stop you. So the strains are emerging, and in some ways, unfortunately, as in Brexit and Eastern Europe, it's manifesting itself in authoritarianism and in some cases, just frankly, racism.
That's a fair point, Julia.
Yeah.
That's
how Trump got in, isn't it? Pretty much. He rode that wave. Yeah.
Terry Belcher from Belcher Consulting, a pleasure to have you on the show. Again, appreciate it. There you go. And that's almost our show there. Now, for tomorrow, Friday's panel, we had a big response regarding the climate change emission. And Professor Ralph Sims said the biggest thing that you can do is think of one thing. It's all down to everyone. What are the small steps that you do every day, every week, to contribute towards making this place a better place in terms of climate change. So that's what we're going to be talking about tomorrow. But for now, Julia Whaiputi and Martin Thomas, it's been wonderful having you both on the panel.
Kia ora, thank you.
What else chat? Oh, very cool track. Oh, Moulin Rouge. This is for you, Mark. Terrible. Terrible song.
Listen to this. Magical.
Ruining the show. All right, see you tomorrow.
Te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Haere nei, the elderly New Zealanders being used and abused behind closed doors, many by their own families. How and why is it going unchecked and unpunished? The racist rant recorded on the answer phone of a Pacifica academic. Fiji cracked 600 COVID cases since April, with infected patients being allowed to isolate at home. Queensland has its own virus dramas after a woman with COVID apparently ignored Victoria's lockdown. World champ and Olympic medalist many times over, Mahe Drysdale, calls time on his rowing career. And have you heard about the caravan of elephants wombling through China? Police escort in tow.
RNZ News at 5. Good afternoon. I'm Marama Tipole. An Auckland woman who is taking her daughter to court to fight for her own home is warning others to be on alert for elder abuse. The 72-year-old woman accepted her daughter's help organising her finances after she separated from her husband and thought she'd agreed to put her house into a family trust. But she says she was taken advantage of and unknowingly signed away her home.
My daughter decided that I'm old now and throw me in a rest home, sign my house over to here. Well, I did sign my house over to here. I just didn't know it at the time. And what has she done? She's taken everything.
The woman is urging older people in similar positions to get all legal documents checked by other people before signing them and says they need to take extra care around their finances. A new report into the death of a tandem skydiver has found there aren't proper life jacket standards for parachutists. The skydiving industry is also being warned to teach parachutists how to land in cold water. Californian Tyler Nee died after both parachutes failed and he hit Lake Wakatipu with his tandem master in 2018. The Transport Accident Investigation Commission has found unsuitable life jackets were used and safety rules aren't up to scratch. The Commission's Harold Hendel says the rules need to be reviewed.
To look at the rules and to see where the standards, not only of the life jacket design, but also the requirements of an operator in maintaining and inspecting those life jackets for functioning and being fit for the conditions that they're operated in.
Harold Hendel says the Civil Aviation Authority also should review its system for reporting parachute accidents. The Prime Minister is refusing to say whether the government will put more money on the table to ensure nurses don't strike again. The Nurses Union believes further mediation with DHBs may be difficult as they will need to offer more than their existing mandate. At a news conference this afternoon, Jacinda Ardern remained tight-lipped, instead reiterating the need for productive dialogue.
Ultimately, what we've said is that we all want to be back at the negotiating table. An offer was put via DHBs, ones that really focused on lifting the wages of those on the lowest salary bands. But now it's a chance to get back around the table and to get into talks again.
The Nurses Union and DHBs will reconvene mediation the week after next. A review of primary school staffing has warned that teachers need more time and help to do their job. After reading and hearing nearly 3,000 submissions, a panel convened by Teacher Union, the Educational Institute, is calling for an overhaul. Our education correspondent John Gerritsen reports.
The panel's report says the system for calculating staffing in primary and intermediate schools has barely changed since the 1990s, and schools are struggling to keep up with changes in society. Among them is a tsunami of children with major behavioural and learning problems. The report calls for significant changes, including smaller class sizes, a teacher aide in every classroom, and more access to special education and counselling. Panel members told RNZ it's clear that staffing problems are widespread and action is urgently needed.
Veteran National MP Nick Smith has lauded his work in conservation as a career highlight during his valedictory speech in Parliament. After 31 years, he is the longest-serving MP in Parliament. Mr Smith says as Minister of Conservation in the 90s, making Te Pō Knights a marine reserve was pretty controversial. He says he needed a police escort because he'd received a death threat.
I was confronted only a few years ago at Whangarei Airport by a cheeky local who introduced himself rather unnervingly as the guy who had made the threat. He jokingly told me not to worry, as he now thought it was such a great idea that he would shoot anybody that would dare undo the reserve.
Nick Smith also expressed his disappointment that the government is yet to make progress on a Kermadec ocean sanctuary. It's 5:04. To sport, two-time Olympic rowing champion and five-time world champion Mahe Drysdale says his first Olympic gold at London in 2012 is the undoubted highlight of his career. The 42-year-old, who dominated the single scull for over a decade, has announced his retirement from international rowing. He'd hoped his swan song would be in Tokyo, but the writing appeared to be on the wall when he was beaten by Tauranga's Jordan Parry at the national trials. Drysdale also won a bronze medal at the 2008 Beijing Olympics, despite a serious bout of gastroenteritis and collapsing over the finish line.
London is hands down the greatest moment of my career. I realised my dream of winning an Olympic gold medal. I am incredibly proud of what I achieved in Beijing, but it's fairly bittersweet to me because I didn't achieve my overall goal of an Olympic gold medal.
England captain Joe Root says the absence of skipper Kane Williamson is a huge loss for the Black Caps, but England can't afford to get sidetracked by it ahead of tonight's second cricket test in Birmingham. Williamson is again out with an elbow injury and will be replaced by Will Young at number 3. Root says the Black Caps still have plenty of batting depth, as Devon Conway showed at Lord's.
He is a big gun. You do spend a lot of time thinking about how you're going to keep him quiet and get rid of him early, and it'll be a huge loss for them, but we're also very respectful that New Zealand have got a good, strong squad of players, and as we saw last week, a debutant coming in and getting a double 100.
The forecast for Birmingham is partly cloudy and 24 degrees, and that's the news.
Stranded Kiwis return from Melbourne.
Very excited to be on the correct side of the ditch. We got a bonus 14 days over there, which wasn't welcomed.
Landing in Auckland, rated the world's most livable city.
This is the first time that a New Zealand city has topped the ranking.
And the primary sector hopes there are more coming.
We're very short of workers. We're losing them to Australia every day at the moment. This will help.
The Trans-Tasman Tug of War. Morning reports weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from mid-service to midnight Friday. Northland, Coromandel and Bay of Plenty, cloudy periods with a few showers. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay mainly fine. Auckland to Manawatu, including the Central High Country. Partly cloudy with a chance of a shower. Horowhenua to Wellington, also Wairarapa, cloudy with isolated showers, becoming widespread for a time this evening. Nelson, Marlborough, Bulla and Westland, partly cloudy. Showers for Nelson and the Marlborough Sounds clearing tomorrow morning. Canterbury and Otago, fine. Southland and Fiordland, showers gradually clearing this evening, but remaining rather cloudy. And the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods. RNZ National, it's 7 minutes past 5.
Kia ora rā, e ho tēnā koutou katoa, nau mai haere mai ki Checkpoint e tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. A desperate fight is on for an elderly Auckland woman's home after her daughter allegedly tricked her into signing documents which relinquished her ownership. The woman's case is one of thousands that social workers and age-concerned staff say they are seeing where older people are taken advantage of by those they love and trust. They want more people to be on the lookout for elder abuse and say the law needs strengthening to protect people who are vulnerable targets. Nita Blake-Person reports.
When 72-year-old Julie talks about the events of the last year, she's extremely sad. But given everything she's been through, she's also extremely strong.
My daughter decided that I'm old now and throw me in a rest home, sign my house over to her. Well, I did sign my house over to her. I just didn't know it at the time. And what has she done? She's taken everything.
Julie, which isn't her real name, is still reeling from everything that's unfolded. Her daughter, who she trusted implicitly, stepped up to help her with her finances after she separated from her husband 12 years ago.
Getting the car registered, petrol, maintenance on the car, fix the house. I had to take over all those things that I'd never had anything to do with in my past. What do you do? It was another world to me.
With her daughter's help, she made decisions around her house, putting it into what she thought was a family trust.
She took me to her lawyer, and I was told, these are the documents for the trust, Mum. You're in the trust. So I assumed these documents I had to sign so that I could be in the trust. And so, of course, I read the first one. It was all about the trust. When I turned over the page, my daughter said to me, don't worry about that. Reading it, she said that you can see on the bottom that it's already signed. She said, just sign it. So from then on, I just flipped the pages at the bottom and I just signed everything, not knowing that I was signing away my home, and that's how it happened.
Then last year, Julie got a phone call which devastated her.
My daughter phoned and said to me, she's selling the house. And when I said, no, you can't do that, I don't want it sold right now, she said, I'm selling the house because I own it. And that was it. It turned out that in signing these documents so that my home could be put into her trust, because it was her idea to put it in the trust, I signed away my house to her.
Julie was totally blindsided. She's suffered anxiety and depression and sometimes struggles eating and breathing when it all gets too much. The house is Julie's only security for the future, and while nothing has happened to it while a case against her daughter is before the court, she's terrified at what she could lose.
Where did she think I was going to live? What did she think I was going to do? Does she need my house? No. Has she got money? Yes. Why take my home? Vindictiveness? For what? No, there's no excuse for it. There's no reason for it. It's just pure and utter greed. Drop me in a rest home somewhere and forget about me. You know, the government will take care of me. That was her idea.
Julie now has no contact with her daughter. She's tried with texts and phone calls which go unanswered. And while the whole ordeal has been incredibly hard, she's speaking up to spare others similar suffering.
First thing I'd say, don't sign anything, absolutely nothing, until you've read it thoroughly, and then get someone else to look at it as well.
While Julie's case may sound shocking, her social worker, Anne Foley, says it's not even one of the more extreme cases.
Unfortunately, it very much is not. 85% of the abuse that we see is usually going to be an adult child. And for some reason, the research also seems to show that it's more likely to be an adult daughter.
She says financial abuse is the most common form of abuse towards older people, and there's a terrible attitude around it.
And that is about, well, I'm going to get the money anyway, so why not get it now? My parents have lived their life. I'm the one with the mortgage. I'm the one with the debts. Or it could be that you're an adult child who has a drug and alcohol addiction, a gambling addiction, so you need the money.
Anne has been helping Julie get back on track. She says she's come a long way since her life was turned upside down, but for now she's on standby for the court's decision.
It's placed her in a waiting position where she's just waiting to find out what's now going to happen so that she can get on with her life. Now, that will be a good outcome or it will be a bad outcome.
But Julie is made of tougher stuff and has this message for anyone who may also be being targeted.
Be very much aware, be aware of who you are and what you can do personally. Because you're not as weak as what you think you are. You're really not.
Aged Concerns Auckland CEO Kevin Lamb joins me now. Good evening, Kevin. Are we kidding ourselves about what is going on behind closed doors when it comes to our elderly?
I think we are. This is one of those hidden things in society that we just prefer not to see, but the reality is it's very, very common. I mean, we know that there's been research done which shows that almost 10% of all people over the age of 65 will experience some form of abuse or neglect at some point in their lives. It's very common and it's entirely unacceptable.
So when you say it's common, what evidence is there of the extent of the problem?
Well, firstly, we can just look at the work that Age Concern does across New Zealand. We know that every year there's almost 2,500 cases that are referred to us, of which when we investigate those, 3/4 are substantiated that they are cases of elder abuse. So we're getting 9 calls, referrals a day about somebody somewhere in New Zealand receiving elder abuse.
And so what does that look like? What is abuse?
It can take a whole range of forms. We see lots of people who are experiencing psychological abuse. This is people simply just effectively almost like bullying them, but in ways that make their life almost unbearable. It could be anything from as simple as just abandoning someone in the corner of a house and ignoring them, all the way through to aggressive behaviour, insults being thrown. But as you mentioned earlier in the report, almost half of all cases are also financially motivated. And that can be all the way through from what we heard about Julie's case of someone trying to take their house away, just to the fact that there could be someone out there who's having every week someone's walking off with their EFTPOS card or their pension payments and is just spending money on themselves and not giving it to the older person.
So what's the deal here? Kevin, do the perpetrators not think that what they are doing is abuse?
I think there are some cases where it is simply just being ignorant of the impact they're having on someone. But I think we mustn't kid ourselves. In many cases, this is malicious, it's based on greed, and it's done knowingly that someone is taking advantage of an older person. So
is it a sense of entitlement by family members?
Often it is. I mean, we know that over 80% of the work that we do, the alleged abuse is being committed by somebody who is within the family, often in the same home. And we know that particularly that younger people feel a sense of entitlement of, we now want to get our lives going. We want to get some of the money out of our parents' house, out of our parents' savings. They don't need it. The view almost taken that their life is over. It's now our turn. And it's just so wrong.
Kevin, what a terrible sense of betrayal to have that done to you by, a child or a relative.
Oh, it is. And the worst thing is, even though we sit here and we say, we think 10% of all people experience some form of abuse or neglect, we know that the figures that are being referred through to us are just the tip of the iceberg. For a lot of older people, there is great sense of fear. It's about having their life turned upside down or their independence taken away. All that feeling of shame or embarrassment that someone there who should be looking after them, that should be someone of love, is treating them so badly. So we know that it's underreported because it's just such a horrendous thing to have to face up to, that someone who should be there to look after you is taking advantage of you.
I imagine there is a reluctance to report because of the relationship often between the abused and the abuser, but also in terms of the legal sense. How difficult is it to prosecute, get money back, get reparations?
It's really difficult. And I think there are two things. I mean, one, the legislation is not on the side of the older person often. It's often a case of trying to prove coercion and manipulation. How do you really demonstrate that someone has taken advantage of you? But equally, when money has gone, it's gone. You might be able to prosecute and punish the person who has taken the money or taken the dignity or the self-esteem away from someone, but you can't always get it back, and it's too late. So the legal sense, it's not strong enough, and often it simply isn't going to solve the problem in the long run.
So what can we do? What can people do?
The one good thing about this is there's lots of things that we can do. Each and every one of us in our communities can simply make a real material difference. So we can just look out for our older relatives, our older neighbours, those people who live in our communities, and check in on them, make sure they are okay. Look out for unusual behaviour or changes in behaviour, things that you notice just aren't quite right and normal. And the other thing that people can do really easily, it's actually help themselves. One of the great things people can do is actually visit an older person on a regular basis. We encourage people to go through their local age concern, sign up with an age concern, and go and visit an older person who doesn't have anyone out in the community looking out for them. And it's really simple to do. And you have someone going to visit someone on a regular basis, they're far less likely to fall into those traps of vulnerability and being taken advantage of.
And what if there is an older person listening to this who recognises everything that you're saying and thinks, that's me, I'm being abused?
The key thing I would say is it is not okay. No matter what other people are telling you, if you are feeling abused, if you are being taken advantage of, you do not have to put up for it. You can reach out for help. Just pick up the phone and contact someone who can help you. If you can't contact anyone you know personally, contact your local age concern. There are age concerns right across New Zealand. It's really simple. They just need to call out on we've got a free phone number on 0800 65 to 105, a simple phone call, and someone can help you.
Thanks for your time this evening. That is Kevin Lamb, who is Aged Concerns Auckland CEO. It is almost 19 minutes past 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Still to come on the program, we're live to Queensland for the latest on the COVID cases there. A health expert is warning against the Fiji government's plan to isolate COVID-19 patients at home amid the escalating cases in the country. The Health Ministry announced the move amid a daily record of cases, taking the total number of infections since April to over 600. There have been calls for the government to declare a state of emergency, but Prime Minister Frank Bainimarama says there's no need. Christine Ravoy reports.
Health authorities in Fiji say they are unable to isolate those infected with COVID-19 at its facilities and are sending positive people home instead. The government is preparing to focus on caring for severely ill patients as opposed to its current strategy. But epidemiologist Michael Baker says it's evident the Fijian authorities are beyond their limits in managing the latest outbreak.
While there's huge danger in sending home people who actually have this infection, because many of them will be going back to multi-generational households that may be fairly crowded, and it'll be very hard for them to avoid infecting household members and really propagating this outbreak even further.
Fiji's Health Secretary James Fong insists there's no need for alarm as the latest cases are coming from known clusters. But he says Fiji has not reached its peak yet and they are working with the WHO to reassess the status.
That's why we are looking at other donors, that's why we're looking at setting up field hospitals, and that's why we are responding with escalated surveillance screening. We are going to start hitting the ascending phase, the acutely ascending phase of our epidemic, which is what happens in this type of pandemic.
Opposition National Federation Party leader Biman Prasad accused the government of not being in control of the crisis. Police Chief Rusiata Tundravu says people are not heeding the ministry's advice to stay home and follow COVID-safe procedures.
We are trying our best to control the crowd. People are calling for that there is no 2-meter distance here, but you have to understand the situations that we are facing. People, they hire carrier, they hire vehicles to come down. Just the limited times they have, they want to get as much as they can, and then they get back to their various villages.
The crisis has further impacted businesses. Despite a curfew, the president of the Suva Retailers Association, Jitesh Patel, says they are concerned at the large number of people flocking to the city.
In a way that we want customers to stay home and do the shopping from home. Most of the businesses are doing deliveries as well. So like the city, we're still seeing that people are coming to the city and want to do their shopping like they used to do before. But we have to understand we're in a new normal.
Meanwhile, the Fiji Women's Crisis Centre has reported a spike of over 60% in domestic violence cases over the past 3 weeks. The centre's coordinator, Shamima Ali, says amid the health concerns linked to COVID-19, women need to find a safe space if they are being abused.
This is a time when we should get together. Look after your family well. Look at what your wife is doing, the women in your house, what they are doing. Appreciate that. Help them. Be part of that family. Contribute. Your contribution is so important in this. We're all in this together.
She says the centre also has a referral line for men, including those experiencing trauma caused by job losses because of the pandemic. A man who tested positive for COVID-19 died, but his death is not being attributed to the virus. The Health Ministry says he died of complications from a chronic medical condition.
There's a testing blitz going on in Queensland after a couple who travelled there from Victoria were found to have COVID. The pair drove from Victoria through New South Wales and across the Queensland border. Health officials have identified dozens of close contacts and places of interest across both Queensland and New South Wales. There have been long lines at Sunshine Coast clinics as residents scramble to get tested, and Sunshine Coast Mayor Mark Jameson is with me now. Good evening, Mayor. What's the deal with this woman? Why was she travelling across state lines?
Well, hello, Lisa, and hello to all your listeners. Look, I can't answer that question. I don't know for sure. That might have been dealt with by the health department, but clearly we want to discourage that sort of behaviour. To leave, she and her husband did leave Melbourne during the lockdown and travel through New South Wales and into Queensland. Clearly puts a lot of other people at risk. Whether they were aware they had COVID or not, I don't know. I don't know what the circumstances are around their border passes. But it certainly caused a great deal of consternation here on the Sunshine Coast, as you'd appreciate.
So, how would you characterise her actions then, regardless of whether she knew she had COVID or not? Well, Victoria was in a lockdown.
Exactly. Yeah, no, it's very irresponsible. Puts, potentially people's lives at risk. Certainly puts people's livelihoods at risk. Now, the saving grace for the Sunshine Coast, and this might not be the same for some of those communities in New South Wales that they pass through, but the saving grace for the Sunshine Coast is that the serology tests indicate that they're towards the end of the infection. Which means whilst they're still infectious, they're not perhaps as infectious as might have otherwise been. So the Chief Health Officer has seen fit not to close down sort of vulnerable facilities like aged care, hospitals and so on. We haven't had to face the threat of a lockdown, but we have, of course, required a number of citizens who were in and around those exposure sites that have been identified at the times that have been identified, have been urged to get a COVID test, self-isolate, and probably in time, once they've heard back from Queensland Health, ensure they get vaccinated.
There is a hell of a list of places she's visited, though. So, and what are the consequences of that in practical terms?
Well, it's a bad outcome for those businesses because they've had to do a deep clean. Obviously, that sort of publicity is considered negative, I would have thought. It's certainly inconvenienced a lot of people, but also put a lot of people's health at risk. The Sunshine Coast is a popular destination for retirees, and certainly at this time of the year we have lots of people here, indeed lots of people from New Zealand, and we want to encourage that. So this sort of thing isn't helpful. But I'm confident and confident in the Queensland health authorities and what they're doing to ensure that the spread is limited.
What's the mood in your area, would you say?
Oh, I think people are pretty annoyed. It puts people or creates concerns in people. They become anxious. We've had a pretty good run, to be honest, with COVID, and that's largely due to our community responding favourably and positively to all the steps that they've been asked to do to ensure that it isn't carried in or spread around the Sunshine Coast, and we've managed that really well. So this instance is very concerning, and I'd certainly urge anyone else who is thinking of replicating it not to do it, because it really has some very dire consequences. We've got a number of major events on this weekend and leading into the next few weeks. The Sunshine Coast Agricultural Show being on this week, starting on Friday. To have put that at threat, at risk, is very irresponsible, because the people missed the show last year because of the lockdown. A lot of the sideshow operators in particular have had a really, really tough time because all the shows pretty much around Australia are being closed down. So for them to have missed the second one would have been tragic, not to mention all the volunteers and the work that's gone in, and the people from the farms and whatnot who produce the agricultural produce that's on show, the horse events and everything else. It would be just disastrous. So and the cost of that, you've got to be measured in the millions, really. If anyone else is thinking of replicating it, please don't.
Well, good luck. Let's hope it ends as well as it can. That is the Sunshine Coast Mayor, Mark Jameson, joining us there about the COVID cases in his community. Olympic rowing great Mahe Drysdale has bid an emotional farewell to his rowing family, officially announcing his retirement this morning. Drysdale, who's 42, has dominated the single sculls for more than a decade, winning gold at the 2012 and 2016 Olympics. And you'll remember at the 2008 Beijing Games, suffering from a gastrobug, he famously threw up and fainted after crossing the finish line third and had to be carried to the medal ceremony. Drysdale missed out on the selection for the Tokyo Olympic team after being beaten by Jordan Parry.
Basically, I haven't achieved a spot in the team, and that was always my end was Tokyo, or at some point before, and so that's why I'm walking away now.
Had you made that decision already in your head? You'd thought, make the team, carry on. If I don't, that's it.
I'd made the decision that I'd retire in Tokyo, and then obviously with what's happened this year has meant that I very much thought about it in March, and I guess my career's kind of gone on week by week since then, and it's I guess the only thing that's got me through to June rather than March is things were going pretty well, and I wanted to see it to the end, but I've done that, and haven't earned a spot in the team, and it's time to walk away.
How do you feel about that, walking away?
Great, to be honest. I wasn't ready to do it in March because I hadn't overcome, the injury issues that I had last year, and I felt like I've seen that through now, and while I guess the hard thing is I'm disappointed not to go to Tokyo. I know what I have achieved, and it was always it was never a given, I guess, that I was going to go to Tokyo because I had standards in my own head, and obviously external standards to meet for rowing New Zealand, and so it was a pretty easy decision in the end to finish up, and I'm very proud of what I've achieved over the years, and really excited, I guess, to watch what the New Zealand rowing team is going to achieve, because I think it's going to be pretty special what they can do in Tokyo.
You said great with some enthusiasm then, Mahe. What's great about retiring from your point of view?
I think just I've done this for 21 years, and it was time for a change, and it's been a hard year, the last year, because I thought I was going to be finished in August last year, and as a family, and we had a lot of things that that we had planned to do and wanted to do, and then this last year obviously it was just battling injury and then fighting my way back, and it's been quite a tough year in that respect. So now that it's over, it's nice to have that end point and know that the new life really started on Saturday last week, and it's just nice to wake up to the kids and be able to take them to school and do things like that. And they've given me a massive amount over the past 20 odd years, and there's a lot of people that have added to my success, and it's been really nice this week just letting the important people know that I was going to step away and have those conversations with them, and looking forward to having some time now to hopefully be able to catch up with them and have some different experiences in life.
Had the fun gone out of it for you?
Not at all. I absolutely love what I do and have enjoyed it. It's been tough because I've been battling my body and pushing it beyond where it wanted to go. But I still had those goals. But I'm someone that's very very focused on what I needed to do, and when I didn't achieve that, I very much switched off very quickly and moved on to the next thing. And it wasn't a hard decision in that respect. The hardest part of this whole week was this morning going and telling all the athletes that I was leaving, and they've been a part of my life for the last 21 years, and the team means a massive amount to me, and I just have so much love for the sport and what I do, and that was an incredibly hard speech to deliver to them. Was
it pretty emotional? That
it was, yeah. I didn't even get to the first line of my speech, without tears in my eyes, and didn't stop for probably the next 15, 20 minutes, and that was hard. But as I say, there's no disappointment in it. It was just pure love for knowing that what I've been passionate about, what I've done for the last 21 years is no longer, and just that team is so special to me, and I'm no longer part of it on the inside, and I'm a supporter of them from the outside, and it's just a change, which is always hard.
Do you reckon you've done your grieving for that, Mahe? Have you reconciled yourself with that?
Oh, for sure. It was weird, as I said. There's no tears, there's no sadness at all this whole week, and I started writing my speech last night, and I cried while I wrote my speech. I cried during the night, and I cried when I delivered it, and I haven't cried since. But it was very emotional to it's leaving. It's almost like leaving your family behind, and they have been a second family to me for as long as I can remember. So it's pretty special, and I really appreciate everything that everyone has done for me, over the years, because I couldn't have achieved half the success without them.
I know this is like asking someone to choose their favourite child, but is there a moment in your career, a highlight, that is, the highlight for you?
London Gold. That was my dream coming into the sport, was to win an Olympic gold medal, and to achieve that. It's special. So, that will always be the highlight of my career.
And that was retiring Mahe Drysdale. Now, in breaking news, the government has just announced New Zealand's quarantine-free travel pause with Victoria will continue for a further 7 days. So that travel pause has been extended with Victoria another 7 days. Kia ora, e te iwi, haere Haere nei e a checkpoint, the racist rant left on an academic's answer phone. The Black Sticks hockey teams are named for the Olympics. And the elephants who packed their trunks more than a year ago and are still wandering through China. Homai o whakaaro, we would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the programme this evening. Let us know your thoughts. You can text us 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or flick us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. It is time now for the headlines with Marama.
Thank you. Good evening. An Auckland woman who's taking her daughter to court to fight for her own home is warning others to be alert for elder abuse. The 72-year-old's daughter offered to help organise her finances after she and her husband separated, and the woman thought she'd agreed to put her house in a family trust. She's urging others to get someone else to check all legal documents before signing. A new report into the death of a tandem skydiver has found parachutists have no proper life jacket standards or guidance on unexpected landings in water. Californian man Tyler Nee died in 2018 after both parachutes failed and he and his tandem master hit Lake Wakatipu. His body has never been found. The Transport Accident Investigation Commission says their life jackets were unsuitable and safety rules weren't up to scratch. The Prime Minister will not say whether the government will put more money on the table to prevent a repeat of yesterday's nurses' strike. The Nurses' Union says DHBs will need to offer more when mediation resumes the week after next. At a news conference this afternoon, Jacinda Ardern merely reiterated the need for productive dialogue. A review of primary school staffing says teachers urgently need more time and help, including smaller classes, more teacher aides and wider access to special education. A panel convened by Teacher Union, the Educational Institute, is calling for an overhaul after receiving nearly 3,000 submissions. It says the system for calculating staffing has changed little since the 1990s and schools struggle with a tsunami of children suffering behavioural and learning problems. The Automobile Association wants the government to explore alternative strategies for reducing transport carbon emissions. The Climate Change Commission wants a rapid increase in electric vehicle sales, aiming for nearly all cars to be fully electric light by 2050. But Simon Douglas from the AA says there won't be enough EVs and the government should also invest in biofuels for internal combustion engines. Those are the latest headlines. I'll be back with more news at 6. And before I do go, congratulations to all of the Checkpoint team. Well done at the New Zealand Radio Awards. I understand, hold on, I've got a little list here. Checkpoint, best team coverage of the COVID lockdown, best producing team, big ups to our team and they're behind the scenes. And also, Lisa, congratulations, best talk presenter for a breakfast or a drive show. Well done.
Thanks, Marama. No mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint, called Lisa Owen TNA. It is time for the business news with Nicholas Poynton. It's a bit awkward, isn't it, Nicholas? Okay, tell us about this new capital raising market for small firms.
Yeah, really exciting announcement that came out today about this new capital raising, new share trading platform that's going to be really aimed at small to medium-sized enterprises. These are firms that would otherwise be too small to list on the NZX. They have, ideally they'll have sort of market valuations of between $6 and $60 million. Typically firms that list on the NZX...
Whoa, that's a big scope, isn't it?
It is a huge scope, yes, and it's for firms that are going to look to raise up to $20 million in the future. And the CEO of this new marketplace, it's called Catalyst, which is probably quite a fitting name, says the whole idea is to create a cheap and easier way for firms to list and get access to capital. Because unlike the NZX, this new platform, it won't require firms to engage in continuous disclosure, which can actually be quite timely and be incredibly resource intensive. That's, constantly notifying the market about new contracts you've engaged into or disruptions you've noticed in your business. And they won't have to do this because the shares won't be traded on a continuous basis like they are in the NZX. You won't be able to buy the shares every single day. Rather, the shares will be traded in periodic auctions, and it's before these auctions where firms will have to sort of announce or make their company announcements about any changes that they've seen in their business from the prior auction. And the potential here is really that this market could be a potential launch pad or help catapult smaller firms eventually onto the NZX main boards in the future. And this whole proposal, there's a number of interesting things going on here, because we've heard in the past about small businesses who want to, get more cash into their business but don't want to take on debt, really struggle to get their hands on capital. So it seems like this platform may be a really straightforward way to help address that. The other thing is maybe good news for investors like you and me, who we may look through this marketplace, we may see a firm that we like the look of. We think it's got real potential to grow in the future, and it gives an opportunity for you and I to maybe invest at a really early stage and be part of the journey as that company hopefully continues to grow. And we spoke to an investment analyst about the potential of this platform today. That was Mark Lister from Craig's Investment Partners, and he says he's quite open-minded to the potential that he sees here. He says there's plenty of really good SMEs, small to medium-sized enterprises in New Zealand that struggle to get access to capital. So he's encouraged that this is going to actually hopefully help firms really grow in the future. But there is also a degree of trepidation, mainly because the firms will not be continuously disclosing information about what's going on in the business, and there's also an issue with liquidity. That is how often those shares are being traded, given the fact that it's going to happen on a periodic basis. So Catalyst will be up and running from the 21st of this month, so only in a few weeks' time, and they're in talks with about a dozen firms who've got plans to list. They hope to have 16 firms on its marketplace in the first year, but up to 200 in 5 years' time. So they have plans for some huge growth there.
Yeah, big expansion. Okay, let's talk about retail spending. It remains strong. Well, I found this really interesting because, yesterday we're talking about freight constraints and people not being able to get hold of the goods they want, so is what they want to buy out there.
Yeah, that's one of the funny things we're seeing at the moment, that the demand is really there. It's the supply that the issue is, but it seems that people are managing to find things to buy, looking for any excuse to swipe their cards, because the latest stats we've got out from Stats NZ is that for the third consecutive month, retail sales from electronic cards rose. They're up 1.7% month on month. People continue to buy consumables. Those are things you tend to buy once, food and drink, going out to restaurants. But there is also really strong indications that spending on durables remains strong. Those are big ticket items, things you buy once or from time to time. That's up 2.4% month on month. And when you dig into the durables data, some interesting trends emerge. It seems that there's clearly been this trend since COVID-19 emerged on DIY. People are spending more time and more money on hardware and things like that, maybe to zhuzh up how things are looking at home, redecorating their homes, more money being spent on furniture and electronics as well. And the strong spending data, it does suggest that it really does lower the chances that we'll see maybe a contraction in the economy for the June quarter. However, we won't know because those numbers won't be out for about 3-4 months' time. But next week, we are getting the GDP figures for the March quarter. And I had a quick look at one of the forecasts that were put out this week. The expectations are that the economy may have grown just about 0.5% in the 3 months to March. That's really as the economy suffered as not having international tourists come in during the normally busy summer months.
Shall we take a trot around the markets, Nicholas?
Yeah, the NZX is down 49 points to 12,518. The dollar's at 71.8 US cents and 93 Australian.
Thanks, Nicholas. Nicholas Poynton with Business. A review of primary school staffing has found teachers desperately need more time and help to do their job. After reading and hearing nearly 3,000 submissions, an independent panel convened by Teacher Union, the Educational Institute, says the whole system needs an urgent overhaul. Teachers told the review they are drowning in children's behavioural problems, and there is a tsunami of 5-year-olds arriving at schools with major problems. Here's our education correspondent, John Gerritsen.
The report says the system for calculating and allocating primary school staffing has barely changed in 25 years. But society has changed a lot in that time, and schools are struggling to keep up. It says small improvements will not be enough, and it calls for an overhaul including smaller class sizes, a teacher aide in every classroom, and more access to special education and counselling. At the report's launch at Parliament today, panel member and school principal Peter Verstappen said the government should take the findings seriously.
It's crunch time. Something's got to change. We've seen that band of goodwill and professionalism stretch to the limit. Things have got to change, and I think now's the time to do it.
He says the panel received more than 2,600 submissions, and they showed that teachers and principals across the country are facing similar challenges.
Teachers need more time to be able to do their job well. They need some more supports wrapped around them of various kinds that allow them to meet the rising number of challenges and needs they face so that they can do the job that they know they're capable of doing and that they want to do.
The report recommends extra staffing for mainstream schools with large Māori roles, te reo Māori lessons for all teachers, and a service to show them how to reflect Māori culture in their teaching. Former Principal Whetu Cormack says the recommendations followed powerful calls from Māori teachers and principals who told the panel the school system is racist.
The system, as they see it, and I would agree, is racist. The education system that we have, or colonisation in many ways, was to rub out Māori culture and language. We have Māori, they're not going away, and so we have to make sure that we provide an education system where they can be themselves, because ultimately that's going to benefit our nation as a whole.
There have been calls for better staffing in primary schools for some time, but panel member Kathy Wiley, who's a senior researcher at the Council for Educational Research, says this report is different.
The last review was back in the early 2000s, and staffing hasn't shifted in its substance since 1996. I mean, that's an incredible time, and society has changed so much since. Really, this is the first report that I know of that actually brings together what's changed in the student population, what's changed in how we do teaching and learning, what's changed in how we're leading.
The president of the NZEI, Liam Rutherford, says the report provides clear steps for improving staffing in primary and intermediate schools.
We're encountering story after story of teachers and principals not being able to cope because of the issues with the current staffing model, and what this report does really well is mark out a pathway forward.
He says the report will now be used by the union's members when they meet at the end of the month to discuss their next pay claim.
It is 14 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. He muriaki e ngā pita kōrero. After the news at 6, the government's eased visa restrictions for 10,000 foreign workers, but has it gone far enough? A racist tirade left on the answer phone of one of the country's most preeminent Pacific academics has caused widespread shock but little surprise. Others working in the space say that while this one is one of the worst examples they've seen, such abuse isn't uncommon. RNZ Pacific's Jamie Tahana reports, and a warning, some of the content in this report is distressing.
Malo lovely sorry for mamalangi ma kirana bola.
Jemima Tiatia Seith, renowned academic and author with decades worth of accolades, member of several governance organisations and co-head of the School of Māori and Pacific Studies at Auckland University. On Sunday, a public lecture she gave was broadcast on RNZ.
I bounced the idea around with some friends and asked, what do you really want to hear? And they said, well, you never hear enough about what it's like to be a brown Pacific female academic in the academy. I went, okay, then we'll give it a nudge.
What followed was an hour in which she opened up about that life, the loneliness of being one of the only brown female faces in a room, of how academic structures don't account for a Pacific worldview, or how journals are often prioritised over what's good for community. That was broadcast on Sunday. When Dr. Tiatia Seith came into work after the long weekend on Tuesday, this was waiting on her answer phone.
I'd like you to listen to me, Jemima. I don't think the way you think. Did you know that universities were invented, created, designed in England?
The first university in the modern sense was opened in Italy in 1088. But what followed was a further 7 minutes of racist diatribe, littered with inaccuracies and hatred. Dr. Tiatia Seith was shocked.
I just sat there, and there was just like a huge sadness, pain, mamai, sorrow for the people that she was speaking. She was talking about us.
But she wasn't surprised. This isn't the first time. She says it probably won't be the last.
I viewed or envisaged that it would be an opportunity to out it, to call it out, and it will provide a platform for those that are not heard. I mean, some of the feedback I've gotten are families are sitting around the table listening, crying, and openly talking about it.
Dr. Siriana Napi, a sociologist at Auckland University, has extensively researched the reality for Māori and Pacific in academic spaces. What her research established is that Māori and Pacific academics earn nearly $8,000 less than their peers and are 65% less likely to be promoted and deal with much more blowback. The inequities could not be explained by research performance, age or field.
The university system that we have is a Pākehā university system that's slowly coming to terms with what it means to be a university within Aotearoa, within the Pacific. And this means sometimes facing that we do have different value systems within this country and that these different value systems advantage certain people.
RNZ's head of content, Megan Whelan, says if the comments were left on a company phone, a zero-tolerance policy for abuse would apply.
While the policy that we have doesn't cover that, and I would assume that the university does have a policy that covers that, I think we need to think about as an organisation and probably as an industry generally how we value and protect the people who share their stories and skills and expertise with us.
Megan Whelan says the company will be examining how it can support Jemima Tiatia-Seith. Dr. Tiatia-Seith says she felt compelled to share the message and she hopes it can help in some way. She'd already laid it out in Sunday's lecture.
But, you know, if we just, like I said, if we just sit back and let it happen, it's just the same thing's going to happen. And you've got to have the strength to really, shake shit up.
She's considering what further action she may take.
The Far North District Council has agreed to halt progress on establishing a significant natural area, but it won't stop a hikoi of more than 1,000 people converging on the council office tomorrow. Work will stop until the policy is finalised, following massive opposition from Hapu and Iwi in the Te Tai Tokerau. Miriana Johnson reports.
Opposition to significant natural areas has been building in the north for months now. Hapu and Iwi were shocked to find much of their whenua had been identified as significant natural areas, where they may need to apply for a council consent just to clear native scrub. The Far North District Council were jumping the gun. The National Policy Statement on Biodiversity has yet to be finalised, but councillors say they were just bringing their district plans in line with the Northland Regional Councils. Minister responsible for biodiversity, James Shaw, has told the council to taihua. And today, the Far North Mayor, John Carter, has heeded those calls.
It's on hold, and we've heard the people. The minister's working with us positively to address it.
Te Poari o Ngāti Wai Chief Executive Huhana Linden has welcomed the move, but they will continue to march.
Our people want to show the strong resistance and opposition to SNA implementation in our region. We welcome the opportunity to co-design what that would look like for our region, but right now our people want to hikoi, and that's what we're going to do.
The National Policy Statement is still in the works, but is due to be finalised in July. Green Party co-leader and Uri o Te Hiku, Marama Davidson, whose hapu are part of the march, is assuring her people the policy statement will uphold Te Tiriti o Waitangi.
Protection and conservation plans are those that uphold the mana motuhake of hapu and Te Tiriti over their lands and waters. And so this is what the NPS is hoping to strengthen. So this is what we're very clear on and have always been as the Green Party, that it is upholding the mana. And, you know, it's Te Hukatu, my hapu are marching this Friday.
Minister for Local Government, Nanaia Mahuta, says these significant natural areas will help iwi and hapu, not hinder them.
As Kaitiaki, if they knew that there were significant Indigenous species on their whenua, one, that would help them make decisions about their land use. Secondly, the land use capability is another compounding matter that would help Māori landowners identify whether or not actually all Māori land is able to be developed in the same way. I suspect not.
Te Runanga o Ngaitau Kai Whakahaere Lisa Tumahai says that's unlikely to convince members of her iwi, especially on the west coast.
They've got their very, very strong view that this is another land grab. You know, we've already come through grievance, 150 years of grievance in terms of the loss of land as the people
this is seen as another way of locking up land.
She says the policy needs to be redesigned and the government should go back to the drawing board with iwi and hapu. The hekoi in the north, which got underway at dawn this morning at Te Herenga Wairua, will converge on the Far North District Council Kaikohe office tomorrow at midday.
National MP Nick Smith has apologised to the LGBTQI+ community in his valedictory speech at Parliament this evening. He's bowing out after 31 years as an MP. In his speech, Nick Smith said he was wrong when he voted against the marriage equality bill.
Their error is all the more personal with my 20-year-old son being gay. I want to put on record today my apology to New Zealand's LGBT+ community. I pay tribute to Louisa Wall, Fran Wild and Amy Adams for their leadership that has improved the lives of my son and thousands of other New Zealanders. I also acknowledge Jenny Shipley's courage as the first PM to attend a gay pride parade in '99.
There were lighter moments too. Nick Smith joked that the worst thing ever inflicted on him was when the Speaker tried to be kind while on tour in Turkey.
The motorcade consisted of a car for the Speaker as the head of delegation, a van of MPs and their partners, and motorbikes back and front. Lindley and I got a bad tummy bug, and the Speaker took pity on us, offering us the flash Merc for the 400k return journey. It got complicated when the interpreter decided he had to go in the van with the head of delegation, leaving Lindley and I with a driver who did not understand a word of English. My plight was trying to explain to a driver doing 130 kilometres an hour in an escorted motorcade that I was desperate to go to the loo. It was an excruciating 3 hours.
Jim Bolger, Jenny Shipley, Maggie Barry and Nikki Wagner were among those who came to farewell Dr. Smith. A herd of wandering wild elephants has captured the attention of the world, clocking up millions of views online. They've travelled 500 kilometres through South China over the last year and are now followed by drones and accompanied by police. And while it all may seem very sweet from afar, as Lydia Batham reports, they're also causing havoc.
It was a moment of rest for these wandering elephants that reverberated around the world. Drone footage shows the herd of 15 lying snuggled up around each other on the ground, catching some winks in a forest. A baby elephant, trapped between 3 adults lying back to back, the only one awake, trying to wiggle free. But this herd hasn't always been so peaceful. For over a year they've been on the move after leaving a wildlife reserve in South China. They're now 500 kilometres away on the outskirts of the city of Kunming, home to more than 8 million people. Along the way, they've caused more than $1 million worth of damage. They've roamed through towns and streets, forcing locals to stay inside. Water tanks have been drained and fields of crops have been chowed down. Now they're under 24/7 surveillance. Drones buzz above them, watching their every move. In attempts to steer them away from villages, trucks laden with snacks like corn and pineapple are sent in to entice them away. No one knows why they began their journey north. Some think shrinking rainforests in their home prompted the trip. Others fear they've got lost. And after the nap that went viral, the herd are on the move again. Where to? No one knows. But regardless, hundreds of government officials and millions online will watch on as they trample their way there.
The wombling caravan of elephants. Some of your feedback now before we get to the news. On Twitter, Richard says, Mahe Drysdale, an extraordinarily accomplished rower, but with down-to-earth human emotion and no difficulty with tears. He is what makes a real man. Malcolm's got in touch to say, I'm appalled at the morals of someone who would do such a thing to a parent, like dispossessing them. This is on our piece about elder abuse. Remember, people, your parents are gods. They created you.
RNZ News at 6. Talovalava, I'm Marama Tipole. The government has extended the pause on quarantine-free travel with Victoria for a further 7 days. The COVID-19 Response Minister, Chris Hipkins, says the overall risk is low, but health officials say the bubble should not be reopened. There are now 93 cases associated with an outbreak in Greater Melbourne, spread over 4 clusters with more than 15,000 close contacts. While nearly all infections are genomically linked to cases arriving from overseas, there are at least 3 where no link has been found. Mr Hipkins says the pause will be reviewed again next Wednesday. It does not affect New Zealanders returning from Victoria, who must return a negative test before flying home. A social worker for an elderly woman tricked out of her own home by her daughter says it's not an uncommon example of elder abuse. The 72-year-old Auckland woman is taking her case to court after she signed over her house to what she thought was a family trust. Instead, she says she was tricked into giving it over to her daughter. Age-concerned social worker Anne Foley told Checkpoint it's not even one of the more extreme cases she sees.
Unfortunately, it very much is not. 85% of the abuse that we see is usually going to be an adult child. And for some reason, the research also seems to show that it's more likely to be an adult daughter.
Anne Foley says people need to be aware of the dangers of elder abuse and look out for older people in their communities. A new report into the death of a tandem skydiver has found there aren't proper standards for life jackets for parachutists who risk landing in water. 27-year-old Tyler Nee of California died after both parachutes failed and he hit Lake Wakatipu with his tandem master in 2018. The Transport Accident Investigation Commission report has found unsuitable life jackets were used and safety rules aren't up to scratch. Its Chief Investigator of Accidents, Harold Hendel, says recommendations have been made to the Civil Aviation Authority to review the rules and life jacket standards, but none were issued to the operator NZone.
The operator, having learned from this accident, has taken quite a few steps to improve their operations and their emergency procedures.
Harold Hendel says they're satisfied with NZone's changes. The Far North District Council has agreed to hold progress on establishing strict rules on areas of ecological significance. It comes after massive pressure from iwi and hapu in the north to stop the classification of up to 40% of the land as significant natural areas to protect the high number of native plants and animals. 1,000 people are set to protest outside the council's Kaikohe office tomorrow. The minister responsible for biodiversity, James Shaw, and local government minister Nanaya Mahuta have called on the Far North District Council to hold off until the national policy statement is implemented. The Mayor John Carter says he's agreed to stop establishing SNA for now after meeting with Mr Shaw today. A West Coast mayor is critical of the Climate Change Commission's emphasis on electric cars, as she says they won't be practical for her residents. In its advice to the government on how New Zealand can become carbon neutral by 2050, the Commission wants a rapid increase in EV sales. But the Mayor of Grey District Council, Tania Gibson, says EVs are not suitable.
We live in a very hilly, isolated area. Where are these electric vehicles coming from? You know, we're in a low socioeconomic area. A new electric car's $50,000 a pop, really. We have no public transport. So how are they going to afford these changes in the next 10 years?
The Commission wants the transport fleet to be entirely electric by 2050, but currently EVs account for 0.5% of the current fleet. National MP Nick Smith has apologised to the LGBT plus community in his farewell to Parliament. Mr Smith gave his valedictory speech this evening, looking back at his accomplishments and regrets during his 31 years as an MP. He said he was wrong when he voted against the Marriage Equality Bill.
Their era is all the more personal with my 20-year-old son being gay. I want to put on record today my apology to New Zealand's LGBT plus community.
Nick Smith then paid tribute to Louisa Wall, Fran Wild and Amy Adams for their leadership, which he says has improved the life of his son and thousands of other New Zealanders. RNZ's Checkpoint has won several major categories at the country's radio awards. Lisa Owen has been named the Best Breakfast or Drive Talk presenter, and the show's producers have won Best Talk Show Production Team. The programme also won Best Team News Coverage for its special on the day the lockdown was announced. RNZ's podcast, The Service and Black Sheep have also taken out awards. It's 6:05. To sports now, labourer, apprentice, electrician and cow milker are all options for two-time Olympic rowing champion Mahe Drysdale now that he's announced his retirement. Drysdale, who also won 5 world championships and dominated the single scull for over a decade, had hoped his swan song would be the Tokyo Olympics. But time has finally caught up with the 42-year-old, with Tauranga's Jordan Barry set to replace him in the single scull at next month's Olympics. Drysdale says he feels immensely proud of what he's achieved, but it's now time to find another passion.
One of my mates is an electrician. I'd love to go and, basically be an apprentice for a couple of days, go help build a house, go milk some cows, just to have those experiences and try to get a gauge on what really motivates me. And, coaching I don't think is for me. So, I've got to find something that gets me out of bed every morning.
Novak Djokovic has set up a mouth-watering semi-final showdown with Rafael Nadal at the French Tennis Open in Paris. The world number one has overcome Italian Matteo Berrettini in the last of the quarterfinals to book another Grand Slam meeting with the 13-time champion. Djokovic says Nadal is his greatest rival.
Each time we face each other, there's that extra tension and expectations, and just vibes are different, walking on the court with him.
Meanwhile, 4 first-time Grand Slam semi-finalists remain in contention for the women's singles title. Louis Venton is returning for a 9th season with the Wellington Phoenix, re-signing with the A-League Football Club for the 2021-22 campaign. And that's the news.
This week, Country Life's heading to a tiny Southland town with a curious name to see what makes it tick.
Not so long ago, they sold houses here in Nightcaps for $1.
We can get down to -4. The school can be closed due to snow. We're a resilient bunch, though. We're up for it.
People care about each other.
It's a beautiful area to live in.
Join us in Nightcaps Friday night at 9 and Saturday morning after the 7 o'clock news on RNZ National.
And now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Friday. Northland, Coromandel and Bay of Plenty. Cloudy periods with a few showers. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay mainly fine. Auckland to Manawatu, including the central high country. Partly cloudy with a chance of a shower. Horowhenua to Wellington, also wide at upper, cloudy with isolated showers, becoming widespread for a time this evening. Nelson, Marlborough, Buller and Westland, partly cloudy. Showers for Nelson and the Marlborough Sounds, clearing from tomorrow morning. Canterbury and Otago, fine. Southland and Fiordland, showers gradually clearing this evening, but remaining rather cloudy. And the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods. The time is 6:08.
Kia ora rā e hoa. And no mai hoki mai, this is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. It's one of the cornerstones of the Climate Change Commission's advice to the government on how to become carbon neutral. But how feasible is it? The Commission wants to see a rapid increase in electric vehicle sales to combat the amount of emissions coming from transport. But as it stands, electric cars make up just a tiny fraction of the country's entire vehicle fleet. Our reporter Harry Locke and camera op Dom Thomas have this report.
Road transport is the driving force behind nearly half of all of New Zealand's CO2 emissions. Reducing it is one of the Climate Change Commission's main focal points on how to reduce the country's overall carbon footprint. The Commission wants to steer away from petrol and diesel cars and turn towards EVs. And there is appetite.
In terms of emissions and what it's doing to the environment, I probably would consider getting an electric car.
But with most EVs costing tens of thousands of dollars, price is a formidable barrier.
I've had conversations with people over the years about how it's a lot more affordable to have an electric car, but you have to have the money up front to be able to buy the electric car. So I would totally have an electric car if I could, but there's no way I could afford to buy an electric car at the start.
Mileage is a big problem as well. John and his wife are going to be replacing both their petrol cars in the not too distant future.
Basically, I would be looking at probably an electric vehicle because of the range. When we do go to Auckland from time to time, I need a petrol vehicle probably to get right through to that.
On the question of both mileage and price, Mayor of Grey District Council Tanya Gibson says neither works for her residents.
We live in a very hilly, isolated area. Where are these electric vehicles coming from? We're in a low socio-economic area. A new electric car's $50,000 a pop, really. We have no public transport. So how are they going to afford these changes in the next 10 years?
But in some parts, the popularity of electric vehicles is increasing. Bruce Stewart is the owner of Coventry Cars in Lower Hutt, one of the first dealers to have a car yard selling only EVs or hybrids, with 80 vehicles on site. He says their success is probably down to their role in this niche market.
Sales are generally heading up in the electric hybrid and generally heading down in the petrol and diesel. But that is probably more, from our point of view, as a business thing, and that's what we target. We're targeting something that most other dealerships don't have in electric and hybrid.
Bruce Stewart says price will always be an issue.
I don't believe there's ever going to be an electric car that's less than $3,000 or $4,000 that's capable of going on the road, because the batteries are almost worth that not being on the road. It's definitely going to be a problem for people who can't afford much more than $3,000 or $4,000 car, and I think that is a fairly big space in the market.
He says for EV buyers, they need to know what to expect, and the rule is the more money you'll put in, the more mileage you'll get out. The Climate Change Commission wants to see a rapid increase in electric vehicle sales. The scale of that challenge is huge. Just 26,000 cars are electric, out of a national fleet of 4.6 million. By 2035, the Commission wants nearly all light vehicles entering the country to be electric, so that by 2050, all road transport is decarbonised.
Some are wondering whether that's just implausible and think more environmentally friendly solutions, such as biofuels or hybrids such as this one, should be part of the government's strategy.
Simon Douglas, the Policy and Research Manager for the AA, says we also need to consider the supply chains.
Nissan, in the entire history of producing Nissan Leafs, have produced 500,000 of them to supply the whole world. New Zealand is such a small part of that market that we really have to think hard about how heavily we're depending on EVs and their availability.
He says while production will pick up, the government still needs to look at other strategies. The Climate Change Commission's advice does also aim to reduce car dependency by improving other modes such as walking, cycling or public transport.
New border exemptions are being welcomed, but the business and hospitality industries say the government's underestimating the size of the problem. The green light's been given for about 10,000 foreign workers on temporary visas to stay in the country for another 6 months to ease labour shortages. But some in the industry say the numbers boost is just a drop in the bucket. Kim Moody reports.
Ever since our borders slammed shut in March last year, there have been calls to allow more foreign workers in. Today, some relief. A 6-month extension for temporary workers already here. The horticulture sector's pleased, but Summerfruit NZ Chief Executive Kate Hallstrom says more problems lay ahead.
For summer fruit, obviously our harvest season will be in around about 6 months' time, and so some of those working holiday visa and SSE visa holders, their extension will start to drop off right in our harvest period.
But it might have come too late for the hospitality sector, which says it's reached crisis point. According to Restaurant Association Chief Executive Marissa Bidouin, COVID-19 has left the industry on its knees and there's not enough staff to help it get back on its feet.
The industry is really needing more people to sustain the growth over the coming months. Without people, we cannot run our businesses. And I've had many conversations with business owners who are either reducing their trading hours or some are even closing.
The exemptions will also allow 250 farm workers and vets into the country in a bid to lighten the load for the primary sector. Workers will be able to bring their partners and dependent children into the country. Into NZ Immigration Advisor Katie Armstrong thinks it's a bitter pill to swallow for some migrant workers already here, separated from their families.
What about the other 3,800 that are needed across the industry desperately? And what about those dairy farm workers who are in the country right now, separated from their families for coming up 2 years, with no respite in sight for them, yet a new dairy worker can come in with their family.
Business NZ Chief Executive Kirk Hope reckons an extra 200 dairy workers just isn't enough to lighten the load. He says that number could have been doubled and it still wouldn't have met soaring demand in the dairy sector alone.
One of the things that perhaps needs to be recognised is that there is already an immense strain. If we've got a workforce that's working at capacity already, if you look at the dairy sector, that will mean that there's a lot of strain on farmers who can't get the workers that they need for the forthcoming season, and that will place a lot of pressure on them, additional pressure that could be easily alleviated by ensuring that they can get access to some skilled labour.
45 South cherry exporter Tim Jones says long term, the government needs to do more to ensure enough workers are on the ground for the spring harvest.
The next thing I think we really need to be focusing on is getting two-way travel between the Pacific so that the RSE scheme can get back somewhere near what it was. And that's a nationwide issue. It's not just a Central Otago issue or a cherry issue, but it's all fruit industries, veggie industries that are reliant upon that labour.
Immigration Minister Chris Farfoy says 6 months is the maximum visa extension by law, but it's likely to be extended again down the line if things don't improve. He says he sympathises with split migrant families and would take another look at how the latest extension affects them.
It is almost 17 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. The Black Sticks hockey teams are hoping the element of surprise will be on their side at the Tokyo Olympics. Both the women's and men's squads for the Games were announced today, adding another 32 athletes to the wider New Zealand group. The team's relative isolation to their rivals has meant just 4 international matches for both since the COVID-19 pandemic hit last year. But as Clay Wilson reports, the Black Sticks believe that could be their advantage in Japan.
4 tests in 16 months. While their European rivals have long returned to action, international matches have been hard to come by for the Black Sticks in the lead up to the Tokyo Olympics. It may not be ideal, but men's striker Jacob Smith says there are 2 sides to every situation.
We're framing it completely differently. I think our team is dangerous, relatively unknown, and we're looking at the positives of coming in here, having worked really hard for 4 years, and coming in as a bit of an unknown factor and trying to go all the way.
New Zealand women's captain Stacey Michelson agrees. The veteran of nearly 300 tests says the country's COVID success means they're not necessarily at a disadvantage.
We've probably had more consistent training weeks but less matches, and then the Europeans have probably had more interrupted training weeks and more games, and I think you definitely never know who had the better side of it. For us it's just about doing everything we can in our preparations and then making the most of those game opportunities when they come.
Those opportunities are golden for women's coach Graham Shaw. The Irishman says last month's series against Australia in Palmerston North and a return series in Perth later this month are key to their preparation.
That's what we've missed, is that pressure, that build-up. It's very, very difficult to replicate that on a week-to-week training block. So just being able to put them in those situations was invaluable. And then these games now in Perth, obviously with the Olympic squad selected, and try fine-tune the small details, I suppose, going into the final 4 weeks.
Also crucial during that period, Shaw says, will be staying up to speed with all the restrictions they'll be under in the Olympic Village.
Most likely the team that's going to be successful in Tokyo will be the team that manages particularly that off-field time. So yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be very, very important for every team to get that bit right.
Jacob Smith says the men's team have exactly the same attitude.
The reality is that if COVID does come through the village, a player might miss out, a team might miss out. Something could happen that we might be unprepared for. So there's going to be a high degree of self and team discipline and how we operate in the COVID environment. And there's no doubt in my mind that will play a factor somewhere along the line.
The first step, though, is getting to Tokyo with their teams intact, especially after the women's side lost veteran player Kayla Whitelock to a serious knee injury in their series against Australia. Skipper Stacey Michelson says they're gutted Whitelock has missed out on a 5th Olympics appearance.
Both in terms of what Kayla brings off the field, in terms of her leadership, her guidance, and the way that she's willing to share and educate the younger girls, but also just her composure on the field. Her ability to keep calm, her ability to control a game are things that we will really miss.
Still, Michelson has 4 other teammates with 200-plus caps to help fill that hole, with the added enthusiasm of several first-time Olympians. The Blair Tarrant-led men's side boasts even more experience, leaving Sean Finlay as the only bolter in that squad after the 19-year-old's impressive debut international series against Australia.
The family of a 21-year-old man have tearfully remembered a bright life cut short by murder at a High Court sentencing today. The judge, meanwhile, ruminated on the depraved and deeply sad childhood of his killer. Justice Campbell found it manifestly unjust to give Ricky Lee Simeon life imprisonment after she stabbed her partner Brendan Hamilton in 2019. Katie Todd was in court.
On May 17th, 2019, Ricky Lee Simeon was 18 years old and had been with her boyfriend, 21-year-old Brendan Hamilton, for 4 years. They had a daughter, Cheyenne, who was turning 1 that day. But instead of celebrating, the pair ended up at his Dominion Road flat arguing. She picked up a kitchen knife and stabbed him in the neck, severing an artery and killing him in minutes. Today, Simeon stood clutching a tissue and blinking at the ceiling in the High Court in Auckland after being found guilty of murder by a jury in February. Mr Hamilton's family sat at the back of the room sobbing, dressed in black shirts with his picture printed on them. Among them, Adonia Lorigan, who finally had the chance to tell her son's killer about the pain she had caused.
I thought this only happens in the movies. This isn't true. I was waiting for Brendan to walk in the front door with this big smile that would light up the room. Then a few days later, my son came through the front door in a coffin. I had a seizure when he came in.
Some of Hamilton's 10 siblings, including his sister Jamie Fruian, tearfully remembered a loving man with a cheeky laugh and an ability to cheer up anyone feeling sad.
I miss him a lot. And I think of him every day and what his life would have been if the circumstances were different. To see how he would be smiling and see how proud he would be of his daughter.
The Crown asked for a sentence of life imprisonment, but Simeon's lawyer Paul Borich QC implored the judge to think of the perfect storm of circumstances that led to the murder. He said Simeon and Mr Hamilton had been in an ongoing dispute, and the murder was the result of recklessness and immaturity, not premeditation. Mr Borich said Simeon's upbringing was one of violence, drugs, trauma and neglect. Simeon was using cannabis and alcohol at 11 years old, then methamphetamine as early as 13 years old, and likely had undiagnosed mental health issues.
Perhaps appalling doesn't do justice to describe the defendant's upbringing. When one reads the reports, there is a picture in my submission of absolute deprivation, a life dominated by drugs, alcohol, partying and a gang lifestyle. And it would seem from some of the material that it wasn't just happening around her, but a lot of it was sadly encouraged by those who should have known better.
Simeon was remorseful, struggling through a short, tearful apology to Hamilton's family.
I am sorry for what I did. Forgive me. I understand and accept how they feel towards me. I have learned things about myself while in jail. Those things will help me in the future.
Justice Campbell gave his deepest sympathies to Mr Hamilton's family and said no sentence could ever make up for his death. He said the offending was serious and Simeon needed to be held accountable. But he told Simeon he also wanted to take into account her background.
Your case is an exceptional one where a sentence of life's imprisonment would be manifestly unjust. You had a deeply flawed, violent and traumatic upbringing. It normalised violence.
Justice Campbell ordered a sentence of 14 years imprisonment with a minimum period of 7 years before Simeon will be eligible for parole. Hamilton's family were silent as the sentence was delivered.
US President Joe Biden has touched down in Britain for a G7 summit on his first trip abroad since taking office. The 8-day trip will start with a meeting with UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson and the Queen at Windsor Castle. Mr Biden will join his first NATO summit as president before meeting face-to-face with Russia's Vladimir Putin. CNN's Jeff Zanelny looks at some of the challenges Mr Biden will be facing this week.
Joe Biden is stepping onto the world stage for the first time as president, and equal to foreign leaders after spending a lifetime as someone's envoy. As Air Force One touches down today in the United Kingdom, Biden has made clear he's intent on reassuring the world that democracy works and is alive in America.
As I told every world leader I've ever met with over the years, it's never, ever, ever been a good bet to bet against America, and it still isn't.
The week-long European tour includes a stop in Cornwall on the southern coast of England to see British Prime Minister Boris Johnson and other leaders of the Group of Seven. First Lady Jill Biden joins at Windsor Castle for an audience with Queen Elizabeth. And then to Brussels for a summit with NATO allies, and to Geneva to meet with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Biden is carrying a message of transatlantic unity and trying to move beyond the lingering baggage of President Trump's America First agenda.
America has been tested, and we've come out stronger for it. We will repair our alliances and engage with the world once again.
No American president has logged as many miles around the globe as Biden. 36 years in the Senate, 8 years as vice president, and then as a private citizen, including this 2019 visit to Germany during the second year of the Trump administration.
We will be back. We will be back. Don't have any doubt about that.
Biden is back, but confronting a wave of new challenges like COVID, climate change, and cyber attacks. Provocations that are testing the new president and America's place in the world in the post-Trump era. He believes in the power of personal relationships, but knows well skepticism toward the U.S. is running high after only recently starting to share vaccines with the world. For Biden, the meeting with Putin holds the highest stakes, with some critics questioning why he's giving the Russian adversary a meeting at all.
We do not regard a meeting with the Russian president as a reward. Joe Biden is not meeting with Vladimir Putin despite our country's differences. He's meeting with him because of our country's differences.
Even inside the West Wing, the summit was subject to internal debate, CNN has learned, but Biden insisted on engaging Putin face-to-face.
There is never any substitute for leader-to-leader engagement, particularly for complex relationships. But with Putin, this is exponentially the case.
At the White House, the first 5 months of Biden's presidency have been dominated by domestic challenges. Yet foreign policy is Biden's first love. At long last, he's setting it and will be judged by it.
The United States is determined to re-engage with Europe, to consult with you, to earn back our position of trusted leadership.
France has entered its next phase for reopening in time for summer. Bars, restaurants, gyms and swimming pools are welcoming people indoors for the first time in 7 months after COVID restrictions were eased. The BBC's Hugh Schofield reports.
Is it just the good weather, or are Parisians actually smiling about something? Suddenly it seems possible that life might indeed be heading in the direction of normal. First, the terraces opened, and now, because COVID cases keep falling, it's the interiors of cafes and restaurants. That, plus the fact that they can now all stay open later, till 11 instead of 9. It's a bit of familiarity that's just come back.
Who cares if the coffee is good or bad, as long as we are inside our cafe? It doesn't taste the same at home.
Today is the first time in 6 months I've been able to sit again in this spot. It's my favorite place.
Next stop, the end of the month, and the curfew is lifted completely, and there are no more limits on the number of people who can sit together at cafes. Of course, many people are still worried that this will turn out to have been a temporary reprieve, and like last year, come the autumn, there'll be another wave of COVID. But then they remember the vaccinations, and the vaccinations really are kicking in now. And then they dare to hope that maybe this time things really are on the mend. Today, gyms and swimming pools were also able to reopen for the first time in months, and there's good news on the tourist front too. If they've been vaccinated, travellers from inside the EU can come freely. Others from so-called amber list countries also need a negative COVID test.
With all this coronavirus, we have been locked down in Denmark as well, so we have a hunger for wants to travelling. So we just need to get away from our children and the normal day. So we have here 4 or 5 days in Paris, just some romantic time, good dinner and good wine. As every year, the first hint of summer brings people out in a rash of optimism. It may be premature, but after the ravages of COVID, who can stop them hoping?
Some feedback before we head off on the issue of elder abuse. Pauline says, now without checks, a non-mobile or able elder may find no choice but to trust a close family member or friend with cards and passwords. At least checks can be overseen by the person at home without computer or internet. Fair point there. And on the issue of electric cars, this listener says the limiting factor is battery production. This is the only thing that makes electric cars more expensive up front. This is changing. There are many, maybe 10 battery factories under construction right now China, each of which will produce quantities and qualities comparable to the world's planet production in 2013. So they're saying the scale up will make them cheaper. Now, before we head off tonight, First Up will be with you first thing tomorrow morning from 5. And speaking of cars, they're revved up about electric vehicles. Join them for the debate.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The government has extended the pause on quarantine-free travel with Victoria for a further 7 days. The Transport Watchdog is calling for a review of life jacket standards for parachutists in its new report on the 2018 death of a tandem skydiver in Lake Wakatipu. The Far North District Council is halting progress on setting up areas of ecological significance after massive pressure from iwi and hapu. Outgoing National MP Nick Smith has apologised for voting against the Marriage Equality Bill in his farewell to Parliament after 31 years. Those are the headlines.